At 8:17 on the anniversary of Blackwater's flooding, the church bell beneath the reservoir rang 13 times. The sound rolled through the cold November air, deep and metallic, though the church had been underwater for 32 years. Hundreds of people stood along the memorial pier, holding candles for the families whose homes had vanished beneath the dam. Then the shoreline speakers cracked with static. "Jonah Mercer." Every face turned toward the ferryman. Jonah stood beside his boat with one hand still on the wet railing. Before he could speak, Town Administrator Elias Rook stepped onto the memorial platform. "Shut down the ferry," Rook ordered. 2 county deputies moved toward Jonah. Rook lifted a printed sheet above the crowd. "This access report shows Mr. Mercer entered the restricted maintenance chamber at 3:42 this afternoon." Jonah stared at him. "I was on the south route all day. Your employee code opened the door. Then somebody used my code." Rook lowered the paper slightly. "The record says otherwise." Whispers moved through the crowd faster than the rain. Jonah's father had been blamed for a gate failure during the original flooding, and the Mercer name had never recovered. Now phones rose around him, as if the town had finally caught the son repeating the father's crime. "You used those dead families for attention," a man shouted. Jonah kept his voice steady. "Check the ferry camera." Rook folded the report. The archive was erased. By who? That is what the investigation will determine. But the deputies were already taking Jonah's arms. Rook suspended Jonah before anyone examined the boat, the speakers, or the access system. His ferry license was revoked on the spot. His keys were taken. His wrists were cuffed beside the candles bearing the victims' names. As the deputies led him toward the parking lot, Jonah looked back at the reservoir. The water near the center had begun to circle. Something pale moved beneath the surface, struck the drowned bell once, and disappeared into the black. The pier trembled under everyone's feet. The tremor passed through the pier and into Jonah's cuffed wrists. One deputy glanced back at the water, but Rook snapped, "Keep moving." Jonah did not resist. That would become another line in another report. At the parking lot, rain gathered on the patrol car. Deputy Mara Venn opened the rear door, then paused when Jonah said, "My coat." "What?" "It's on the ferry. My father's watch is in the pocket." Rook had followed them. "The boat is evidence now." Jonah met his eyes, then logged the watch. For a second, Rook's expression tightened. "Everything will be handled properly." Jonah gave a breath that was almost a laugh. That would be new. Mara looked between them. "Get in, Jonah." He ducked into the back seat. Through the rain-streaked glass, the memorial lights blurred into weak gold flames. One candle had fallen near the railing. Its paper sleeve showed the name Daniel Mercer. His father. Jonah's face stayed still, but his hand closed around the chain at his neck. A small brass key hung beneath his shirt. His mother had given it to him the week before she died, and told him never to hand it to anyone from the dam office. He had spent 12 years pretending that warning meant nothing. Mara climbed behind the wheel. "You know I have to take you in." "I know. You could make this easier by telling me what you were doing near the west spillway." "I wasn't there." She watched him in the mirror. "Then why did your badge open the chamber?" Jonah turned toward the reservoir. Across the lot, a figure in a yellow raincoat stood beside the chained gate to the old service road, too far away to see clearly but perfectly still, facing the patrol car. Jonah leaned forward. "Mara, who's that?" She looked. The gate stood empty. Then the radio hissed, and a woman's voice whispered through the static. "Don't let them take the key." Mara killed the radio. The dashboard went silent except for rain on the windshield. "You heard that," Jonah said. "I heard interference." It used words. Her hand stayed on the switch. "If I write that down, Rook will say we were both rattled." Headlights swept across the patrol car. Rook's SUV stopped beside them. He walked to Mara's window, carrying a clear evidence bag. Inside was Jonah's employee badge. "We found this in the west spillway chamber," Rook said. Jonah leaned forward. "That was clipped to my belt 10 minutes ago." Mara turned. The clip was still there, but the card was gone. Rook's gaze dropped to it. "Then you carried an empty holder. You took it at the pier. Careful." The word came softly. At the sheriff's substation, a printer hummed behind the front desk. A fresh incident report lay beside it, signed, time-stamped, and marked final. Jonah read the first line. Subject admitted entering restricted infrastructure to activate submerged memorial equipment. "I never admitted anything." Rook removed his glasses. "You said someone used your code. That confirms the code was involved. That's not an admission. It is context." Mara picked up the report. "This says I recovered the badge." Rook looked at her. "You transported the suspect. Chain of custody remains intact. I didn't recover it. You're tired, Deputy." Then Rook placed a second page on the desk, a screenshot from the dam's access system. Jonah's name appeared beside 3 entries: 3:42 p.m., 6:09 p.m., and 8:11 p.m. The last entry was 6 minutes before the bell rang. "Print the original server log," Jonah said. Rook smiled without warmth. "This is the original." Behind him, the printer started again. Mara glanced at the tray. Another report was coming through. This one accused Jonah of threatening a county official during arrest. Rook had not heard him threaten anyone, but the signature line already carried Mara's name. The page slid into the tray with Mara's signature already printed at the bottom. She lifted it by one corner. "I didn't sign this." Rook's voice stayed level. "It's your digital authorization. My authorization requires a thumb scan. The system logged one." Mara looked at the scanner beside the keyboard. A thin film of rainwater still covered its glass. No one had touched it since they came in. Jonah watched her notice. Rook reached for the report, but Mara pulled it back. "This stays with me." For the first time that night, his calm slipped. "Deputy, do not interfere with an active investigation." "Then let me investigate." A phone rang in the rear office. Rook turned toward the sound, and Jonah lowered his eyes to the page in Mara's hand. Near the bottom margin, almost hidden beneath the county seal, was a faint grey mark. 3 crooked lines, shaped like a tiny bell. He had seen it before. "Turn it over," Jonah said quietly. Mara did. Pressed into the paper was a shallow circular dent, no wider than a dime. At its center sat the same 3-line bell. "What is that?" she asked. Jonah leaned closer. "My mother used to mark records that had been copied from the old dam archive." Rook stopped halfway to the office. Jonah continued, watching him now. "She said originals were stored on blue stock. Copies made after the flood carried that stamp." Rook returned slowly. "Your mother was a seasonal clerk. She had no authority over records. She had enough authority to know what was fake." The room went still. Mara held the report under the desk lamp. The bell mark appeared again, barely visible beneath the access log screenshot. Both documents had been produced from the same archived source, not from the live system. Rook snatched the pages from her hand. Then every light in the substation went out. In the darkness, a drawer slammed open behind. "Jonah!" Metal scraped against metal, and the brass key beneath his shirt was suddenly pulled tight against his throat. The chain bit into Jonah's neck. He twisted sideways, driving his shoulder into whoever stood behind him. A grunt. Shoes scraped across the tile. Mara's flashlight snapped on. Its beam caught Rook beside the open evidence drawer, one hand wrapped around Jonah's chain. "Let go of him," she said. Rook released it at once. "I was securing county property." Jonah pulled the key back beneath his shirt. "It belonged to my mother." "Then you won't mind explaining why she hid it from the dam office?" The emergency lights flickered red. Rook crossed to the desk and placed a confession form in front of Jonah. "Sign it," he said, and the county would reduce the charges to a memorial disturbance. No felony, no jail. Jonah could leave before midnight. Refuse, and Rook would charge him with tampering with critical infrastructure, revoke his ferry contract permanently, and petition to seize his boat as equipment used in a crime. "That boat is all I have," Jonah said. Rook leaned closer. "Then be practical." Mara stood near the door, her jaw tight. "He needs an attorney. He needs a decision." Jonah looked at the blank signature line. 32 years earlier, his father had signed a statement accepting blame for the floodgate failure. He had believed cooperation would protect his family. Instead, the town printed his guilt on plaques, reports, and school history pages. Jonah picked up the pen. Rook's shoulders eased. Rain hammered the windows. Somewhere beyond them, a siren began to wail from the dam, low and uneven. Jonah lowered the pen until its tip touched the paper. Then Mara's radio crackled. A woman whispered, clear enough for all three of them to hear. "Jonah, your father never signed the original." Rook lunged for the radio. The voice continued. "I have it." The transmission cut off. Jonah set the pen down. Outside, every warning light along the reservoir switched on at once. The warning lights threw red bars across the substation walls. Rook grabbed Mara's radio and tore out the battery. "Nobody leaves." Mara stepped between him and Jonah. "You don't give orders in my station." A crash sounded from the rear hallway. The locked records door swung inward. An elderly woman in a yellow raincoat stood in the frame, breathing hard, one hand gripping the wall. Mud covered her boots. A deep scar ran from her temple into her grey hair. Jonah recognized the coat from the gate. Rook went pale. Agnes Crow. She looked at him. "Still disappointed I survived?" Mara reached for her holster, then stopped when Agnes raised a weatherproof document tube. "I'm not armed," Agnes said, "but he is." Rook's hand moved toward the inside of his coat. Mara drew first. "Hands where I can see them." For several seconds, only the dam siren spoke. Agnes crossed the room and placed the tube on the desk. Her fingers shook, but her voice did not. "I was 17 when Blackwater was cleared for flooding. My family was still packing when they opened the gates early." Jonah stared at her. "You lived in the drowned town." "I lived because your father found me on a church roof." Rook gave a short laugh. "A story from a traumatized teenager is not evidence." "No," Agnes said. "This is." She opened the tube and removed a folded carbon sheet, stained brown at the edges. At the bottom was Daniel Mercer's name. Not a signature, a typed line reading, "Signature refused." Jonah touched the paper as if it might disappear. Agnes slid out a second item, an old maintenance map with a route marked beneath the reservoir. "Your mother kept the copies. I kept the originals. We were waiting for someone who could reach the bell chamber." Her eyes dropped to the chain at Jonah's collar. "The key doesn't open a door," she said. "It opens the bell." A heavy metallic boom rolled up through the floor. The lights dimmed. Agnes looked toward the windows. "Rook has started draining the west channel. If the water falls far enough, the chamber collapses, and every record inside goes with it." Rook backed toward the exit. Then the dam siren changed from warning to evacuation. The evacuation siren swallowed the room. Rook reached the exit first, but Mara caught his wrist and drove him against the doorframe. A small black remote dropped from his coat and skidded across the floor. Agnes picked it up. One red button was labeled West Release. "You called the evacuation yourself," Mara said. Rook looked toward the windows. "The dam is unstable. I was protecting the town." "By destroying the chamber?" He said nothing. A second boom rolled beneath the building. Jonah grabbed the maintenance map, and Agnes pulled open the rear door. "The service tunnel is 50 yards downhill," she said. "Once the spillway empties, we lose the records." They ran into the rain. Water streamed across the access road as emergency vehicles climbed toward the dam. Mara kept Rook in front of her, one hand on his shoulder. Jonah followed Agnes through a rusted gate and down concrete stairs vibrating under their feet. Inside the tunnel, the air smelled of wet stone and old wiring. Agnes stopped at a wall terminal sealed behind cloudy glass. "Your mother built a backup index. The county replaced the computers, but nobody removed this." Jonah wiped the screen. Rows of dates appeared when Agnes entered a code. Mara read over his shoulder. The public flood report listed the gates opening at 6:30 p.m. The mechanical sensor log showed 5:43, 47 minutes early. Another file showed Daniel Mercer's badge entering the control room at 6:12, 29 minutes after the gates had already opened. "He couldn't have caused it," Mara said. Rook's face hardened. "Old sensors drift." Agnes opened the inspection ledger. Every monthly entry carried a different date, but the same paper batch number. The reports had all been printed together years later. Jonah scrolled farther. His own 3 access entries from that evening appeared on the screen. Beside each one was a creation timestamp. They had been entered at 8:26 p.m., 9 minutes after the bell named him, while he was already in custody. Mara turned slowly toward Rook. "You didn't discover evidence," she said. "You manufactured it." Before he could answer, the tunnel lights flashed white. A steel gate dropped behind them. Then water burst through the ceiling seam ahead. Water struck Jonah at the knees and shoved him against the terminal. Agnes grabbed the wall rail. Mara forced Rook down before the current could sweep him away. "Open the gate," Mara shouted. Rook laughed once, breathless. "The controls are in the main tower." Jonah looked at the old terminal. A cable ran from its base into a steel conduit marked Emergency Broadcast. "Agnes," he said, "can this reach the evacuation speakers?" She followed his eyes. It was built to. The water climbed to their thighs. Jonah pulled the terminal cover loose while Agnes stripped 2 wires with a rusted tool from her pocket. Mara dragged Rook closer. "You're going to tell the town what you did." Rook's face settled into the expression he used behind podiums. A frightened old woman, a disgraced ferryman, and a deputy violating procedure. That is what they'll hear. Mara pressed her radio microphone against his mouth. A burst of feedback screamed through the tunnel. Outside, across the dam road and evacuation lots, every loudspeaker came alive. Jonah held the access log in front of Rook. "What time did my badge enter the chamber?" Rook stayed silent. Mara tightened her grip. "Answer him." 3:42. Jonah pointed to the creation timestamp. "Then why was that entry made at 8:26? Rook glanced at the rising water. "System delay." Agnes opened the flood report beside the sensor log. "And Daniel Mercer entered the control room after the gates were already open?" "He altered the clock." "All 3 clocks?" Jonah asked. "Built by different manufacturers?" Voices echoed faintly from the road above. People were listening. Rook's composure cracked. "You think records are truth?" he snapped. "Records are what remain after everyone else is gone." The loudspeakers carried every word. Jonah stepped closer. "So you changed them." Rook looked toward the CEs, Ling realizing too late what he had said. Then Agnes placed the original refusal sheet against his chest. "You made Daniel Mercer confess on paper because he would not confess in person." Rook shoved her away. Mara caught Agnes, but the movement gave Rook space. He lunged for the remote, hit the red button, and a deeper roar filled the tunnel. The floor tilted under the surge. Jonah saw the maintenance map tearing loose in the current. And beneath it, stamped on the concrete, was a brass keyhole shaped like a bell. Jonah dropped to one knee as water tore around him. He pulled the brass key from beneath his shirt and forced it into the bell-shaped lock. It turned with a hard metallic click. A section of the tunnel wall released and swung inward. Behind it was a narrow chamber lined with watertight cabinets. The oldest, bore the faded seal of Blackwater County. Agnes pushed past him and opened the first drawer. Inside were gate control ledgers, payment records, concrete inspection reports, and a reel of magnetic tape wrapped in oilcloth. Every altered public document had an earlier version. Mara held the microphone near Jonah as he read from the original gate order. Emergency release authorized at 5:41 p.m. by Elias Rook Sr. Rook stopped fighting. Agnes opened another file. And here are the invoices. Cheap aggregate, false testing certificates, money routed through a private account. Jonah looked at Rook. Your father ordered the early flood. You spent years protecting his name. Rook's mouth tightened. I protected this town. You protected a plaque. The water climbed to Jonah's waist. Agnes fitted the old tape into a recorder mounted inside the cabinet. Static hissed through the emergency speakers, followed by a man's exhausted voice. Daniel Mercer. If this is being heard, the gates were opened before clearance was complete. I refuse to sign their statement. 17 people were still below the ridge. Jonah closed his eyes for half a second. Then another voice entered the recording, young, sharp, unmistakably Elias Rook's. Sign it, Mercer. Your family keeps its house, or your son grows up carrying this. Silence spread across the loudspeaker system outside. Rook stared at the recorder as though it had become a weapon. Mara said, That's coercion, fraud, evidence tampering, and tonight you tried to destroy the archive. He looked toward the seal at gate. None of us leaves if that channel fully opens. Jonah pulled the remote from the water and examined the cracked casing. One button closed the record, he said. Maybe the other opens the way out. He pressed the unmarked switch. Above them, gears groaned awake. The steel gate began to rise. Beyond it, flashlight beams filled the tunnel as firefighters, deputies, and townspeople crowded the passage. They had heard everything. The first firefighter through the gate caught Jonah by the arm as the current pulled at his legs. Move, now! Mara handed Rook to 2 deputies. He did not resist. Red emergency lights washed over his face while the archive cabinets were sealed, photographed, and carried toward higher ground. Outside, rain struck the dam in silver sheets. Hundreds of evacuees stood behind the barricades, silent beneath the loudspeakers. No one shouted at Jonah now. Agnes emerged last, wrapped in a rescue blanket. She stopped when she saw the memorial pier below. 17 candles still burned beneath plastic covers, their flames bent but alive. By dawn, state inspectors had taken control of the site. The original ledgers, sensor logs, and Daniel Mercer's recording were entered into evidence before witnesses. Mara signed the chain of custody form by hand. No digital shortcuts? Jonah asked. Not tonight. Rook was led past them in cuffs. Without the podium and printed reports, he looked ordinary. At the barricade, an elderly man removed his cap. Jonah, I called your father a coward. Jonah looked toward the reservoir. Then say his name when they correct the memorial. Weeks later, the county replaced the plaque. Daniel Mercer's name was removed from the list of those blamed for the disaster and placed beside the 17 people he had tried to save. Mara's report exposed the forged records. Agnes testified publicly, and the families received the truth withheld from them for 32 years. Jonah's ferry license was restored. On the morning the new memorial opened, he stood beside Agnes at the water's edge. A crane lowered the recovered church bell onto a stone platform. The crowd waited. Jonah pulled the rope once. The bell answered across the valley, not as a warning and not as a curse, but as a record no one could rewrite. For the first time, Blackwater heard the truth before the echo.